Fingers pointed from every direction. Joy Lynn covered her ears, trying to block out the cacophony of mockery. The pristine classroom had become an arena of judgment. The prestigious Westmont Academy prided itself on excellence, tradition, and most notably, exclusivity. As the newly appointed literature teacher, Joy had entered this hallowed institution with idealism and passion. What she hadn't anticipated was the invisible barrier between herself and the privileged students who occupied the polished wooden desks of her senior literature class. Their navy blazers bore the golden embroidered crest of Westmont, a shield that seemed to protect them from the struggles of ordinary life. At 27, Joy was barely older than her students, yet worlds apart in experience. Her simple white blouse and modest skirt spoke volumes without words, marking her as an outsider in this realm of inherited privilege. Miss Lynn, perhaps in whatever community college you attended, this passed for literature analysis. But at Westmont, we expect something more substantial. Alexander Reed's voice cut through the classroom with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The son of a banking magnate, Alexander had perfected the art of polite condescension before he could drive. Joy fought to keep her expression neutral. "Thank you for your perspective, Alexander. Would you care to elaborate on what you found lacking in our discussion of Dostoevsky's exploration of redemption?" A ripple of snickers passed through the classroom. Alexander adjusted his designer glasses, the flash of his luxury watch catching the light. "With respect, Miss Lynn, you've reduced one of literature's most complex moral philosophers to a simplistic narrative of forgiveness without addressing the socio-economic context of 19th century Russia, the psychological implications of Raskolnikov's theory of the extraordinary man, or the historical parallels to Napoleonic idealism." He paused, glancing at his peers for approval. "Perhaps that's an oversight due to your educational background." The unspoken accusation hung in the air, that Joy wasn't qualified, wasn't educated enough, wasn't worthy to teach at Westmont. The familiar weight of inadequacy pressed against her chest. "An excellent point," Joy managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "For tomorrow, I'd like everyone to prepare a one-page analysis incorporating those elements." She turned to write the assignment on the board, using the moment to compose herself. Behind her, whispers fluttered like autumn leaves. "My father says they only hired her to fill a diversity quota. Did you see her shoes? Definitely department store. I heard she lives in the East District Apartments." Each word was a tiny arrow, precisely aimed. Joy had known teaching at Westmont wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected this daily trial by fire. The constant scrutiny, the veiled disdain, the silent assessment of everything from her accent to her lunch choices. When the bell rang, Joy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The students filed out, Alexander lingering momentarily. "Miss Lynn," he said, voice dripping with false solicitude. "My father sits on the school board. He's very interested in the quality of education at Westmont. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear about your teaching methods." The threat wasn't even thinly veiled. Joy met his gaze directly. "I look forward to reading your analysis tomorrow, Alexander." After the last student departed, Joy sank into her chair. 7 more months of this. 7 months of proving herself worthy of breathing the rarefied air of Westmont Academy. From her desk drawer, she withdrew a small, worn book. Not the leather-bound volumes that filled Westmont's mahogany shelves, but a simple paperback with dog-eared pages and a cracked spine. She traced the gold-stamped cross on its cover before opening to a familiar passage. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," she whispered. The words were a balm to her wounded pride, a reminder of what mattered beyond these ivy-covered walls. As she returned the book to its hiding place, she didn't notice Eliza Chen pausing at the classroom door, observing the private moment with curious eyes. The faculty lounge at Westmont resembled an exclusive club more than a teacher's break room. Oriental rugs covered hardwood floors, leather armchairs surrounded a marble fireplace, and an espresso machine, worth more than Joy's monthly rent, gleamed on a sideboard. "Ah, Miss Lynn. Surviving the Reed boy, are you?" Dr. Howard Matthews, the aging head of the science department, looked up from his New York Times crossword. His tweed jacket and bow tie seemed to come from central casting for distinguished academic. "He's challenging," Joy replied diplomatically, pouring herself a cup of tea. "That's one word for it. Entitled menace would be another." The unexpected comment came from Sophia Williams, the formidable mathematics teacher whose reputation for strictness had students trembling in the hallways. "The entire senior class has been insufferable since the acceptance letters started coming in. Oxford, Cambridge, Yale, you'd think they'd cured cancer rather than leveraging their parents' connections." Joy hadn't expected any allies among the mostly veteran faculty. "It makes teaching difficult when they've already decided I have nothing valuable to offer. Westmont students respect one thing above all else: power." Sophia stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You're trying to win them with kindness, which they interpret as weakness." "I don't believe dominance is the only path to respect," Joy said quietly. Dr. Matthews chuckled. "Admirable philosophy, my dear, but perhaps impractical in this particular ecosystem. These aren't ordinary teenagers. They're the children of diplomats, CEOs, and old money. Many have trust funds larger than our lifetime earnings." The conversation halted as Headmaster Worthington entered, his tailored suit and patrician features embodying Westmont's 300-year tradition. He nodded curtly to the assembled teachers. "Miss Lynn, a word." It wasn't a request. In the hallway, Headmaster Worthington's expression was grave. "I've received concerns about your curriculum from several parents. They feel you're focusing excessively on themes of social justice at the expense of classical analysis." Joy fought to keep her voice level. "Sir, we're studying crime and punishment. Themes of moral redemption and social inequality are intrinsic to the text. Nevertheless, Westmont has certain expectations. Our students are future leaders, Miss Lynn, not social workers. Please adjust accordingly." He checked his watch. "And do remember the faculty dress code. Quality matters here." As he walked away, Joy glanced down at her sensible shoes, the ones that allowed her to stand comfortably through 5 consecutive classes. Another mark against her in the invisible ledger of Westmont approval. That evening in her small apartment, Joy graded papers by lamplight. Alexander's essay was predictably flawless in technique and utterly soulless in content, a perfect mirror of his classroom demeanor. In contrast, Eliza Chen's work showed genuine insight beneath mechanical errors. Joy found herself writing encouraging comments in the margins of Eliza's paper, hoping to nurture the spark of authentic engagement. Her phone chimed with a text from her mother. "How's my professor daughter doing at that fancy school?" Joy smiled despite her exhaustion. Her parents, immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to put her through college, viewed her position at Westmont as the culmination of their American dream. How could she tell them that in this gilded cage, her achievements felt hollow, her presence unwanted? "Great, Mom. The students are very bright," she replied, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably in her chest. She reached for her journal, a habit from childhood, and began to write. "Today was another exercise in invisibility. I speak, but they don't hear. I teach, but they don't learn, not because they can't, but because they've decided I have nothing worth knowing." How do you reach minds already closed, hearts already hardened by privilege? I remember what Pastor Michael always says, "Before you can teach, you must first reach." But how do you reach those who believe they're already at the summit? Closing the journal, Joy reached for her Bible instead. The familiar words reminded her that worth wasn't measured by Westmont standards, not by designer labels or family connections or trust funds. She fell asleep with this comfort, unaware of the storm brewing in tomorrow's classroom. The next morning, the senior literature class was unusually quiet as Joy entered. Too quiet. The silence had a texture, an anticipation that raised the hair on her arms. "Good morning," she began, setting her materials on the desk. "Today we'll continue our discussion of—" "Actually, Miss Lin," Alexander interrupted, rising from his seat, "we have some questions first." Around him, several students wore strange headgear, modified graduation caps with extra embellishments and bright colors, adorned with what appeared to be family crests and symbols of prestigious universities. Confused, Joy paused. "What's with the hats?" "Initiation week for the Prometheus Society," Alexander explained with unconcealed pride. "Only students accepted to top 10 global universities are eligible. We've maintained the tradition for 7 generations." Joy noted the elaborate hats, the smug expressions of the wearers, and the wistful looks from those without. Another hierarchy within the hierarchy. "I see. Well, congratulations to the members, but we need to focus on our lesson now." "That's just it, Miss Lin. We've been discussing whether your lessons are adequate." Alexander's tone was reasonable, conversational, as if they were colleagues rather than teacher and student. "Several of us have compared your curriculum to what's taught at Exeter and Andover, and frankly, we're concerned about our preparation for university." The orchestrated ambush was now clear. Around Alexander, 12 students with decorated hats nodded in agreement. Joy noticed Eliza Chen sitting silently in the corner, neither participating nor protesting. "As seniors about to graduate," Alexander continued, "we have the right to ensure our education meets certain standards. So we've prepared some questions regarding your qualifications and teaching philosophy." Joy felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't normal teenage rebellion. This was calculated humiliation. Alexander had positioned himself as the prosecutor, the hatted students as the jury, and Joy as the defendant in a trial where the verdict had been decided in advance. "Alexander, this is inappropriate. Please sit down so we can continue with our scheduled lesson." Instead of complying, Alexander looked around at his peers. "Let's vote. Who believes we deserve answers about Miss Lin's qualifications to prepare us for elite universities?" Hands rose around the room, not just the hatted 12, but others who feared exclusion from the inner circle. In that moment, they weren't individual students, but a single organism of privilege, united in their certainty of superiority. "I graduated summa cum laude from," Joy began, hating how defensive she sounded. "From State University," Alexander finished. "Hardly comparable to the institutions we're entering. Have you published any papers, held any fellowships, studied abroad at Oxford or the Sorbonne?" Each question was another finger-pointing, another judgment rendered. Around Alexander, his court of hatted aristocrats watched with predatory anticipation. One boy with a particularly elaborate cap, decorated with what appeared to be actual gold leaf, pointed directly at Joy while whispering to his neighbor. "That's enough!" Joy's voice cracked like summer thunder. The room fell silent. "This ends now. Alexander, remove your hat and sit down." For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered across Alexander's face, the unfamiliar experience of being firmly opposed, but it passed quickly, replaced by practiced disdain. "Or what, Miss Lin? Will you call the headmaster, explain how you've lost control of your classroom, how you can't command the respect of your students?" His smile was razor-thin. "That would be an interesting conversation, considering the concerns already raised about your performance." The trap was perfectly laid. If she escalated, she'd appear weak and ineffective. If she backed down, her authority would be permanently undermined. Joy felt the walls closing in, 12 pairs of eyes watching from beneath ridiculous hats that somehow represented everything wrong with this system. Then, unexpectedly, a voice spoke from the back of the room. "This isn't right." All heads turned toward Eliza Chen, who had risen from her seat. Unlike most Westmont students, Eliza didn't come from generations of wealth. Her father was a successful surgeon who had emigrated from Taiwan, her admission to Westmont based on genuine academic merit rather than legacy status. "Sit down, Eliza," Alexander said dismissively. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us." Eliza countered, her voice gaining strength. "This isn't a fair evaluation of Miss Lin's teaching. It's just mean." Alexander's expression hardened. "Your opinion is noted. Unfortunately, you're not wearing the hat, so your vote doesn't carry the same weight." Fingers were now pointing at Eliza too, the hatted students turning their collective disdain toward this new target. Joy watched as Eliza's resolve visibly wavered under the onslaught of peer disapproval. In that moment, something shifted within Joy. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Eliza, standing alone against the tide. It was about every student who felt excluded by Westmont's invisible hierarchies. It was about what education should be versus what it had become in this rarefied environment. "Everyone, put your hands on your desks," Joy said, her voice quiet but firm. When the students hesitated, she repeated the instruction with steely resolve. "Hands on desks. Now." Surprisingly, they complied, perhaps caught off guard by her sudden transformation. "Alexander, you've asked about my qualifications. That's a fair question, though your method of inquiry leaves much to be desired." Joy moved from behind her desk, reclaiming the space of her classroom. "You're right that I didn't attend an Ivy League university. My parents couldn't afford it, despite working 3 jobs between them." She walked slowly between the rows of desks, making eye contact with each student. "You want to know if I'm qualified to teach you? Let me answer with a challenge. Tomorrow, Alexander, you will teach this class." Murmurs rippled through the room. "You'll prepare a 45-minute lesson on the themes of redemption in crime and punishment, complete with discussion questions, activities, and assessment. You'll manage student behavior, address various learning styles, and ensure everyone remains engaged throughout." Joy stopped directly in front of Alexander's desk. "Since you believe yourself more qualified to evaluate literature instruction than I am, this should be a simple task." Alexander's confidence faltered. "That's not what you meant. Perhaps you should have considered your meaning more carefully before disrupting my classroom." Joy addressed the entire class now. "Tomorrow, you will all give Alexander the same respect and attention you'd give any teacher. You will complete his assignments and participate in his discussions. And afterward, we'll evaluate his performance with the same scrutiny he's applied to mine." The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Joy spoke over the sound. "That's all for today. Alexander, I expect your lesson plan on my desk by 5 o'clock." As the students filed out, many shooting uncertain glances back at Joy, Alexander lingered. For once, his polished exterior showed cracks of genuine anxiety. "Miss Lin, I was just raising concerns." "I didn't mean to—" "Yes, you did," Joy interrupted calmly. "You meant to humiliate me in front of my class. Tomorrow, you'll learn how challenging teaching actually is. Perhaps that will be educational for us both." Later, alone in the classroom, Joy's composure finally crumbled. She sank into her chair, hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Had she just committed professional suicide? Would Alexander's father have her position by the end of the week? A soft knock interrupted her spiral of worry. Eliza Chen stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Miss Lin, I just wanted to say, that was amazing." Joy managed a weak smile. "Or incredibly foolish. I'm not sure which yet." Alexander needed someone to stand up to him. Eliza entered the classroom, clutching her books to her chest. "The teachers here usually don't. They're either afraid of his father, or they come from the same world he does." "And you?" Joy asked. "Where do you fit in this world?" Eliza's smile held a trace of sadness. "I don't. Not really. My father worked his way up from nothing. The others respect his surgical practice and our address, but I'll never be part of the inner circle." She glanced toward the door. "Especially after today. I'm sorry if I made things difficult for you." "Don't be." Eliza's expression brightened. It was worth it to see Alexander speechless. She hesitated, then added, "I saw your Bible yesterday, after class." Joy tensed, unsure where this was heading. "My grandmother has one just like it," Eliza continued. "She reads it every morning, Says it gives her strength. She shifted awkwardly. Anyway, I just wanted you to know, not everyone thinks like Alexander. After Eliza left, Joy opened her journal again. I did something reckless today. Either very brave or very foolish. Tomorrow will tell. But watching those students with their ridiculous hats, pointing fingers at me, at Eliza, at anyone they deemed unworthy, something broke open inside me. I remember the story of Jesus overturning the money changers' tables in the temple. Sometimes righteous anger has its place. But was this righteous or just pride? Am I fighting for justice or just fighting back? Lord, give me wisdom for tomorrow. The next morning, Joy arrived early to find Alexander already waiting, dark circles under his eyes and a stack of papers clutched in his hands. I've prepared everything, he said, voice stripped of its usual confidence. I was up all night. Joy reviewed his lesson plan, meticulously organized, academically sound, but utterly conventional. This looks thorough. Are you ready? The flicker of panic in his eyes answered before his words could. I think so. When the class arrived, many seemed curious about the unusual arrangement. The hatted students, the self-appointed elite, watched with particular interest as Alexander took his position at the front of the room. Today, I'll be discussing the theme of redemption in crime and punishment, he began, his voice steady enough. Dostoevsky explores moral redemption through Raskolnikov's journey from— Excuse me, interrupted Thomas Wellington, one of the hatted 12 and usually Alexander's closest ally. Could you define moral redemption in the context of 19th century Russian Orthodox theology? I'm not sure your explanation fully captures the nuance. Alexander blinked, momentarily thrown by having his own tactic used against him. Well, it's the process of spiritual restoration after— But that's a modern interpretation, countered Victoria Astor, another hatted member. Wouldn't Dostoevsky's contemporaries have understood it differently? Your analysis seems anachronistic. Joy watched as Alexander's carefully prepared lesson began to unravel. Questions came from all directions, some genuine, others deliberately designed to derail his presentation. The hatted students, performing for each other as much as for Joy, seemed determined to prove they could challenge any authority, even one of their own, who had temporarily stepped into a position of power. By 20 minutes in, Alexander was visibly struggling. His forehead glistened with sweat, his carefully organized notes had become a shuffled mess, and he had lost control of the discussion entirely. When he attempted to redirect with a group activity, half the class ignored his instructions, while the other half completed the task haphazardly. Could everyone please focus? Alexander's request came out more like a plea. Thomas snickered. Is this the rigorous instruction you were advocating for yesterday, because I'm not feeling adequately prepared for Oxford right now? The pointed fingers had turned. Alexander stood alone at the front of the classroom, experiencing for the first time what it felt like to be on the receiving end of Westmont's culture of casual cruelty. He looked directly at Joy, a silent plea for intervention in his eyes. Joy allowed the chaos to continue for exactly 3 more minutes before standing. That's enough. Everyone, return to your assigned seats. The familiar authority in her voice brought immediate compliance, even from the hatted 12, who seemed relieved to return to established patterns. Alexander, thank you for your attempt. You may sit down. Joy moved to the front of the classroom, reclaiming her territory. Would anyone care to evaluate Alexander's teaching performance based on the standards he proposed yesterday? Silence fell. Even Thomas and Victoria seemed unwilling to twist the knife further. No? Then allow me. Joy leaned against her desk. Alexander prepared thoroughly. His lesson plan was well structured and academically sound. However, he struggled with classroom management, failed to engage diverse learning styles, and became defensive when challenged. All common issues for new teachers. She smiled slightly. Teaching, as it turns out, requires more than subject knowledge or prestigious degrees. It requires patience, adaptability, and humility. She surveyed the room, making eye contact with each student. Yesterday, many of you participated in what amounted to bullying, disguised as academic concern. You believed your acceptance letters and special hats gave you the right to humiliate someone you perceived as beneath you. The hatted students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Education isn't about status symbols or establishing hierarchies. It's about growth, intellectual and personal. Joy's voice softened. And growth often requires facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. She moved toward the window, gathering her thoughts. I could continue this lesson by humiliating Alexander further, by pointing fingers at all of you who pointed fingers at me. But that would only perpetuate the cycle. Turning back to face them, she made a decision. Instead, I'm going to tell you a story. My story. One I hadn't planned to share, but perhaps it's time. The classroom was silent now, all pretense of superiority momentarily suspended by genuine curiosity. Before coming to Westmont, I taught at an international school in Malaysia for 3 years. Joy perched on the edge of her desk. But that's the simplified version. The fuller truth is more complicated. She reached into her bag and withdrew her journal. I've kept a journal since I was 12. With your permission, I'd like to read some entries from my time in Malaysia. The students exchanged glances, uncertain about this departure from curriculum, but intrigued nonetheless. Even Alexander seemed captivated. Joy opened to a marked page and began to read. September 12th, 2021. Arrived in Kuala Lumpur today. The heat hit like a physical force when I stepped off the plane. Everything is so different from what I'm used to. The smells, the sounds, the rhythm of life. The school is nothing like I imagined. No air conditioning, minimal supplies, 43 children in my classroom. Most speak limited English. What have I gotten myself into? The apartment they've provided is barely larger than my bathroom at home. I cried tonight, wondering if I've made a terrible mistake. She turned the page. October 3rd, 2021. Met Aisha today, 7 years old, with the most serious eyes I've ever seen. Her father died last year. Mother works cleaning houses. She walks 3 miles to school each day, helps care for 4 younger siblings, yet never misses a class. When I complained about the heat, she brought me a hand fan she'd made herself. For teacher, she said, I feel ashamed of my previous entry. Joy continued reading selected passages, chronicling her journey from privileged American graduate to someone transformed by the children she taught. She read about the school flood that destroyed her few possessions, about teaching under a tarp during monsoon season, about the night she spent in the hospital with a student whose parents couldn't afford to stay with him. December 25th, 2021. Christmas away from family. Was feeling sorry for myself until my students surprised me with homemade cards. Many come from Muslim or Buddhist families, yet they created Christmas wishes because they knew it mattered to me. Mina's family, who barely have enough for themselves, invited me for dinner. They gave me a small wooden cross they'd carved themselves. I've never received a more precious gift. With each entry, Joy revealed more of herself. Not the credentials on her resume or the degrees on her wall, but the experiences that had shaped her understanding of education, of privilege, of what mattered beyond the trappings of status and wealth. April 18, 2022, received news today that Dad's medical bills have depleted their savings. They asked if I could send money home. I've been sending half my salary already. The irony isn't lost on me. I grew up in what I thought was a middle-class American home, never wanting for necessities. Here, I'm considered unimaginably wealthy, while at home, my parents are struggling to avoid bankruptcy from one medical emergency. Where do I belong in this economic spectrum? Nowhere and everywhere. As she read, Joy noticed the shift in the classroom. The hatted students had removed their elaborate headgear, placing the ridiculous symbols of status on their desks or the floor. Alexander stared at his hands, no longer meeting her eyes. July 30th, 2023. Said goodbye to my students today. Hardest day of my life. Little Aisha, not so little anymore, presented me with a bracelet made from seeds and beads. So you remember us, teacher. As if I could ever forget. They've taught me more than I've taught them, about resilience, joy amid hardship, community that transcends circumstance. I came thinking I would lift them up. Instead, they elevated me. Joy closed the journal. I returned to America because my father's health was declining. I took the position at Westmont because it offered the salary I needed to help with his medical expenses. She looked around the silent classroom. So yes, Alexander, you were right. I didn't attend an Ivy League university. My clothes aren't designer brands. I live in an apartment in the East District because it's what I can afford while supporting my parents. She placed the journal on her desk. But I am qualified to teach you, not just because of my degree or my knowledge of literature, but because of what I've learned about humanity, about what matters beyond the walls of privilege. The silence that followed was different from the hostile quiet of the previous day. This was the silence of reflection, perhaps even recognition. Eliza spoke first. Why did you go to Malaysia in the first place? You could have taken a job at any school here. Joy considered the question. I wanted to make a difference. It sounds cliché, I know. But I still believe, that education is the most powerful force for change in the world. She smiled slightly. Also, I had some rather naive ideas about saving children in developing nations. Malaysia taught me that they didn't need saving. They needed respect, opportunity, and someone who saw their potential. Were you scared? This came, surprisingly, from Alexander. Terrified, Joy admitted. I was 23, alone in a country where I didn't speak the language, responsible for children whose lives were nothing like mine. But fear can be a gateway to growth if you don't let it become a barrier. Victoria Astor raised her hand tentatively. You mentioned faith in your journal. Was that important to you there? Joy nodded. Essential. My faith was tested, refined, and ultimately strengthened by what I witnessed, both the suffering and the joy. She hesitated, then continued. I believe each of us has inherent worth that transcends our circumstances, our achievements, even our failures. That belief sustained me when nothing else could. For the remainder of the class, the discussion continued. Genuine questions about Joy's experiences, reflections on privilege and perspective, tentative connections to themes in crime and punishment that suddenly felt less academic and more visceral. When the bell rang, students lingered, reluctant to break the spell of authentic connection that had unexpectedly blossomed in room 307 of Westmont Academy. Alexander was the last to leave. He stood before Joy's desk, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. Miss Lynn, He struggled to find words. I'm sorry. What we did yesterday was cruel. What I did was cruel. Joy studied him. Why, Alexander? You're intelligent, capable. Why expend so much energy establishing dominance? He looked away. My father expects perfection. Westmont is just the beginning. The right university, the right connections, the right career trajectory. There's no room for... He trailed off. Humanity? Joy suggested gently. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Something like that. After Alexander departed, Joy remained in the empty classroom, processing the unexpected turn of events. She hadn't planned to share her journal, to expose so much of herself to students who had shown her only contempt. Yet somehow, vulnerability had accomplished what authority could not. Her reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Headmaster Worthington stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Miss Lynn, a word. Joy braced herself for the inevitable reprimand, possibly termination. Of course, Headmaster. He entered, closing the door behind him. I've received some unusual reports about your class today. Students discussing Malaysia, poverty, and faith, rather than Dostoevsky. I took an unconventional approach, Joy acknowledged. If that's grounds for... Alexander Reed's father called me this afternoon, Worthington interrupted. I expected complaints, demands for your dismissal, perhaps. Joy waited for the axe to fall. Instead, he thanked me for hiring a teacher who finally challenged his son's perspective. Worthington's stern expression softened slightly. Apparently, Alexander came home and announced he wants to defer Oxford for a year to volunteer abroad. After 16 years of careful grooming for the family business, you can imagine Mr. Reed's surprise. Joy struggled to hide her astonishment. I didn't intend to change his career plans? Perhaps not. But you did something rare at Westmont, Miss Lynn. You made students think beyond their bubble of privilege. He moved toward the door, then paused. The dress code still applies, of course, but perhaps your different perspective has value here. Good day, Miss Lynn. The following morning, Joy arrived to find her classroom transformed. The hatted students had removed their elaborate headgear. More surprisingly, they had rearranged the desks from straight rows into a circle, a small but significant departure from Westmont tradition. We thought this might be better for discussion, Alexander explained. If that's acceptable. Joy nodded, moved by the gesture. Very acceptable. As she began the lesson, she noticed a new energy in the room. Questions that probed deeper, responses that considered multiple perspectives, connections between literature and life that hadn't been voiced before. Near the end of class, Victoria Astor raised her hand. Miss Lynn, you mentioned your faith yesterday. Would it be appropriate to ask what gave you comfort during difficult times in Malaysia? Joy considered the question carefully. Prayer gave me space to process what I was experiencing, to find meaning in both beauty and suffering. Could you? Victoria hesitated. Would you mind showing us how you prayed, I mean? The request hung in the air, unexpected and unprecedented at Westmont, where discussions of personal faith were generally considered inappropriate outside of formal religious studies. Joy looked around the classroom, meeting the eyes of each student. Prayer is deeply personal. I wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Please, Eliza said softly. I think we could all use some guidance right now. After a moment's reflection, Joy nodded. If anyone prefers not to participate, that's completely respected. She waited, but no one moved to leave. In Malaysia, when things became overwhelming, I would often begin with gratitude, then move to humility, and finally to purpose. Joy closed her eyes. If you're comfortable, you might close your eyes as well. Around the circle, eyes closed one by one. Alexander, Victoria, Thomas, Eliza, and eventually every student. Thank you for this moment of connection, Joy began softly, for the privilege of learning together, for the capacity to grow beyond our assumptions and prejudices. Help us recognize the value in each person we encounter, regardless of external markers of status or success. In the quiet classroom, something shifted. An invisible barrier dissolving, a collective breath held too long finally released. Grant us humility to acknowledge our limitations, courage to extend beyond our comfortable boundaries, and wisdom to discern what truly matters in this brief, precious life. Alexander's face showed traces of tears behind closed eyelids. Victoria reached silently for Thomas's hand. Eliza's expression held a peace Joy hadn't seen before. Guide us toward purpose greater than achievement, connection deeper than competition, and compassion that transcends circumstance. Amen. Amen, echoed through the room. Some voices confident, others whispered, all sincere. When eyes opened, the classroom felt different. Not dramatically transformed, Westmont's centuries of tradition couldn't be undone in a single prayer, but subtly altered, as if a window had been opened in a stuffy room, allowing fresh air to circulate. Over the following weeks, the change persisted. The Prometheus Society, with its exclusive hats, gradually disappeared, replaced by a student-led initiative to establish a relationship with a school in Malaysia. Alexander, once the ringleader of elitism, became an advocate for service learning. Eliza found her voice, no longer afraid to contribute her unique perspective. 3 months later, Joy received a letter from Alexander's father, Miss Lynn, When Alexander was born, I envisioned a specific path for him: prestigious schools, influential connections, eventual leadership of Reed Financial. I invested considerable resources in ensuring this trajectory. When he announced his intention to defer Oxford and spend a year teaching in Malaysia, my initial reaction was anger. I blamed you for disrupting 17 years of careful planning. Alexander insisted I read your journal entries, which he had transcribed. Reluctantly, I did so. Your words challenged assumptions I didn't realize I held. I write not to rescind my son's plans, but to thank you. You've given Alexander something his privileged upbringing couldn't: perspective. While I still believe excellence and achievement matter, perhaps they're not the only metrics of a worthwhile life. The Reed Foundation has established a scholarship fund for Westmont graduates who choose to teach in developing nations. Alexander will be its first recipient. With appreciation, Edward Reed Joy placed the letter in her journal, a tangible reminder that transformation was possible even in unlikely places. The classroom, where fingers had once pointed in judgment, had become a space where hands now reached out in understanding. On her desk, next to her worn Bible, stood a framed photograph of her Malaysian students. Beside it now was a new image: her Westmont seniors gathered in a circle, no elaborate hats in sight, joined in the simple, profound act of prayer. Different worlds, separated by oceans of privilege and circumstance, momentarily bridged by something more powerful than wealth or status: the recognition of shared humanity, the quiet revolution of compassion in action. When Joy opened her journal that evening, she wrote, "Faith isn't just about believing in what can't be seen. Sometimes it's about seeing what others believe can't exist. Transformation in unlikely places, growth in rocky soil, light penetrating the most carefully constructed walls of privilege. Today I witnessed that kind of miracle in room 307.